Hey guys, NJ here. So we are looking at this DAL Prop 5.1 folding DIY FPV kit. Quite interesting, eh? Now I know many of you will think, oh, this looks a bit gimmicky, but you might be surprised with the results of this. Now, the idea of a prop like this we're used to seeing on things like a DJI Mavic or something which is generally more cruisy, low RPM, and where folding down into a very small package is important. But I think this will have a surprising number of advantages for the FPV guys as well. So bear with me and we'll talk about it for a bit. So the idea of a kit like this, let's talk about the pros first. Obviously, the nice thing is when you assemble a kit like this, you see each one of these comes with a kind of a center hub here. You've got each individual prop, so you get 4 of these center hubs, 4 of these kind of compression fit top plates that go on top, and then you've got each individual blade, so you'll have 6 clockwise and 6 counterclockwise. That go onto each stem like that and can freely rotate. The nice thing, as I mentioned, if you're like me and you run a 6-inch frame but 5-inch props, as I do with my Osiris, is it's a bit of a tight squeeze in my FPV backpack, but this makes things obviously quite nice because, actually reassembled here, you can fold this down, so it makes it more compact. But for the more serious FPV pilots, you're probably more interested in the performance. Yes, that's great that you can fold it into the backpack, but that's no good if they don't fly very well. So let's talk about the advantages of what we can call a center-seeking propeller. Now, what I mean by that is that if you take a prop and allow it to freely rotate on its hinge, you actually have a couple of advantages. Now, if we talk about, first of all, the fact that this is nothing new, this idea is nothing new. Even if we look at real rotary aircraft like helicopters, if we look at the RC helicopters, of course, which can run into many thousands, they all use this system of having a bolt through the prop somewhere close to the center of rotation, where the propeller can actually self-center as the RPM increases. And I know there are a few of you that are probably going, oh yes, that's centrifugal force. So yeah, that's kind of a dirty word. Centrifugal force isn't actually a real force. It's a relative force felt to, well, I guess you, if you were stuck here, sat on the end of the propeller, but it's not actually what's happening. The actual direction of rotation, or the mass and the velocity of the propeller itself. Let me grab one that's, have I got one that's going in the right direction? I should have. Here, yes. So if we're going off in this direction, this velocity and inertia of this propeller is actually this direction. It's perpendicular to our axis of rotation here. It wants to go off in this direction, and it's the center-seeking force, the centripetal force, which is actually acting on helping center that. It's a combination of these two things. Now, the kind of rough force that we use to describe this outward center, this outward pulling force, is centrifugal, but that's not really a force, as it were. The easiest way I can describe this, to put it down in the smallest number of words, is that centrifugal force is actually just a lack of centripetal center-seeking force. Which is this force that kind of acts outwards in this direction. What you have to realize is if we're rotating like this in this direction, you would think with the idea of centrifugal force that if this was suddenly to detach, that its direction that it would actually fling is this direction, but it's not. If this bolt was to just fail, this attachment point, the direction that this would be going, the mass and velocity of this is this direction, and that's the direction it would continue going. As soon as it detached, bang, it would go off in that direction, not in this direction. And it's the center-seeking centripetal force which holds it, and that's the force which the combination of two which will give us our self-centering. So with that kind of out the way, let's move forward. And remember, centrifugal force is a bit of a dirty word. Okay, rant over. So what we have here with that self-centering is something that will find its natural central position and its perfect central position. Each blade will do that as the RPM increases far more precisely, in fact perfectly, pretty much, compared to what an injection molded blade is. If an injection molded blade comes out, and let's just say one of the blades, obviously I'm massively exaggerating this, is slightly out, what you then have is the static balance of the prop would be out. And it only has to be like something you couldn't even see with the naked eye, just fractionally out. And there would be some vibration in there. If the prop is allowed to center seek, then basically you'll always have perfect balance. And if you look at anyone else that's reviewed this, you'll also notice them say how incredibly smooth they are, and that's because of this effect. They end up being statically balanced near perfectly, which is why they are super smooth. So I'm expecting them to fly on a kind of a smoothness tilt very, very nicely indeed. This isn't to be confused with dynamic balance. Dynamic balance is another thing. That's to do with, for instance, if there was a slightly heavier pitch on this prop than the other two, that would create a force in this direction, and that would take it out of dynamic balance. If you were to stick it on a prop balancer, which is what we used to do in the olden days with our props that went onto RC planes, etc., you put it onto a near frictionless shaft that's sitting vertically. Sorry, the shaft's horizontal. So the prop would sit vertically, and then as it spins round, you should be able to just let go of the prop and it stays where you leave it. If it wants to swing down and kind of pendulum, you knew you had a heavy prop, and you would literally sand a little bit off the top here until statically it was balanced. But again, that is different to the dynamic balance, which will be once it's rotating and has aerodynamic effect on it, then you would see if there's any forces acting this way, and that would mess with it. But yeah, it's the static balance that we kind of have an advantage with center seeking props like this. So we've got the folding advantage, we've got the static balance advantage with the centripetal force, and then we've also got potentially the crash advantage with the, you know, if during a crash this sticks hits into the ground like that, this can fold in either direction, so it should be more crash resilient as well. So I think there's a lot of advantages to this. What we need to do obviously is go out and fly it. Let's see how it is, and then we'll report back. So yeah, let's stick this on the 6S Osiris, go and have some fun and see what happens. So in terms of the flight, that felt smooth as butter. I mean, my Osiris flies smooth as butter anyway, so it's not really the kind of quad where I can notice the difference, but it's certainly not in the other direction. It's equally as smooth, and I guess if I had slightly more beaten up props, it would have felt even better. But yeah, the smoothness is there. That's not a surprise to me because of what we discussed with the center seeking forces acting on the props. Everything felt really good. Obviously, I didn't crash test them. You know, I'm a complete wussy when it comes to crashing, and I try and avoid it at all costs. But you know, for how cheap these props are, pick up a set, see how you feel about them. Just give them a go. I'm actually really impressed, and I'll keep them on at least until I ding them up, and then maybe swap some blades out. From the aesthetic point of view, if that matters to you, and I admit I'm a little bit like that, I'm very particular about colours on my builds. You can get different coloured props and different coloured hubs. So for my blue and black Osiris, I could go with black blades and blue hubs, or vice versa for something a little bit different. That's quite cool. As I said, will fit in the bag a little bit nicer right now. If there's one thing I would suggest DAL change on this, it's really to do with when you start these up from scratch. So when you're basically sitting with the motors off and you start them. One thing you can do with the RC stuff is this, with the helicopter blades, you do mess around with the tension of the bolts to make sure that there's a little bit of friction there, so that when it's starting from 0 RPM and spinning up, everything doesn't just sort of jump off to one side. Like this, and then it pick up speed like that with all the weight over to one side, because you'll have obviously a lot of vibration until there's enough RPM for everything to suddenly center seek. It will find that very quickly, but if these were a little bit stiffer, when you fold them out, they'd stay there during that low RPM spin up until there's enough forces to keep these all holding out nice and straight. There was no issue during motor braking, because I know a few of you may think, well, what about when the motors brake right down? Does that then flap enough to cause it to do that? No, it doesn't. It's absolutely fine. I threw every maneuver I could at them, and it was absolutely perfect. But either way, I really enjoyed these. I'm going to keep them on and keep flying with them. I strongly suggest you give them a go. Links are in the description. If you want to grab a set and check them out, I think you should. I quite like them. They get a thumbs up from me. More stuff on the way, couple of exciting videos coming up with some different things going on, but more on that when we get to them. Take care for now. See you in the next video.